I'm a loudspeaker anyway.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's right direct.
So, hey everyone, I'm Dr. X, as was introduced. I'm Senior Security Researcher at CyberAdapt, and I am responsible for keeping everybody on track and presenting our speakers. So here we have two awesome speakers. We have Qasim Ijaz, and he works from Blue Bastion, and we have Andrew Clinton, and he works for Aviana Healthcare, and they're going to make their introduction, and they're going to talk about spilling the beans. So enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's weird being in South and talking about beans. Like y'all probably know better how to spill beans than we do. So I'm Qasim, as I mentioned. I work at Blue Bastion Security. I'm the director of offensive security there, and we've got Andrew.
I'm Andrew Clinton. I'm a director of cybersecurity at Aviana Healthcare. We're a large healthcare provider based out of Atlanta, Georgia.
And this talk really is a culmination of text messages. Okay. Of course, it's presented more in like a PowerPoint now because hey, we are professionals after all. But Andrew and I were for many years now just complaining to each other how terrible the Pentest was, or how terrible the scope was, or how we fired a consulting firm or something like that.
What did this company do? What did this company do well? What did they do poorly? The original incarnation of this talk was intended, I don't need slides, I just need 45 minutes in a podium, and I'm not complaining.
Yeah, just give me like a lazy boy and just lay in there and just complain for a while. Yeah, so the talk is really about the ways we found some consulting firms do good work, the ways we found them not do great work, and we'll talk about the perspective of a consulting firm, and then the perspective of a client, but also perspective for a candidate. Okay, so why don't we start with that? So client-wise, it's going to be how do you evaluate a consulting firm? Are they doing good work or not?
How do you engage with your security partners and get the most value out of those engagements? What to keep an eye out for. There are good security consulting firms, there are not so good security consulting firms, and there are challenges with navigating those relationships, and we'll talk through a little bit of that. And then we'll jump into working as the consultant or the consulting firm. How do you engage with the client? How do you push for transparency and really build that relationship? And then, as Q mentioned at the very end, we've got a section on as a potential employee of a consulting firm, if you're looking for a job, what can you keep an eye out for to try to avoid toxic workplaces or places you don't want to wind up?
Because we did wind up at a few places that you shouldn't wind up. So.
Real world stories. I think before we step into the actual details, a little disclaimer. So a lot of this stuff, all of this stuff, it comes from real world experiences that Qasim and I have had either together or at firms we've worked at. They're all point in time stories. We're not naming and shaming in this session, although we'd kind of love to.
Well, we're shaming, but we're not naming.
Shaming, but not naming.
Yeah.
But it's all real stuff that we experience, but it's all point in time. So any firms that we encounter the problems with may no longer be the situation there. They may have changed, they may have updated, but it's still a good story to tell. So not naming, but talking about frustrations and challenges and how to approach them. All right, so for our first perspective here as the client, one of the most important things that you want to talk with your consulting firm about are your goals. This is a critical item to communicate, especially in those initial discussions where you're talking to sales, or you're talking to engineering, you're trying to arrange for a pen test or some sort of an audit. Any initial sales discussions, scoping discussions, you want to make sure that your goals are brought to the table and that the company that you're talking to has the ability to help you achieve those goals. Sometimes there's a breakdown there. A lot of the times the sales representatives will be happy to sell you whatever you're asking for, but can they actually do it? And do they actually have the staff to achieve what you want to do? Are you looking for a comprehensive mobile pen test for an application that needs 3 weeks worth of work? Do they have the skills on staff to do it? Do they have the availability? You want to have those conversations, be upfront with that stuff, make sure you get clear answers, and make sure that that's a two-way conversation, and that it winds up in the documentation. As you're talking through, hey, these are my goals, this is what I want to achieve with this engagement, we're paying you X amount of money for services rendered, make sure that those details of your goals wind up in the contract, the quote, or the statement of work somewhere in writing so that they're actually followed through on. As I've seen several situations where we have a really good conversation with sales engineering. Maybe we even got one of the testers on the phone, and everything sounds perfect. They're going to be testing everything to the spec that we are requesting in this specific scenario. And then the paperwork comes through, super generic, high level, and then when the actual testing comes down the pipe a month later, we get the wrong tester, and we get bad results. And it's not what we asked for, not what we expected. So goals are really important. You want to be upfront about them, and you want to make sure they're understood, received, discussed, and then represented in the paperwork. Otherwise, you might run into some risk.
Yeah, and one thing I'd also add to that, you define the goals. You had the conversation. Make sure it ends up on the SOW, on the statement of work, okay? Because sales built that statement of work. Sales had that conversation with the client. Me as a tester, I am maybe 2 or 3 layers broken further from sales. So I might not even hear about what conversations happened. First thing I'm going to do as a tester is look at the SOW, the statement of work. If it does not talk about those goals, or at least at a high level, I don't know about them. So if it is not on the paper, you may not be as well covered as you might think. Just because you had a conversation with sales, who knows if sales even took notes?
Sales love to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we can do that. We can do that, sure.
We got you.
Sure.
We got you.
$50,000, please.
So as we're talking about the goals, and as we're talking about how make sure the goals on the paper and whatnot, the flexibility to meet the goals is also a very important piece in there. Okay, are they going to have the skill set? Andrew mentioned earlier getting a mobile app pen test. Oh yeah, we got mobile app testers, not a problem. And then on the side, they go to the hiring manager, go, hey, can you hire a mobile app pen tester before the test starts? All right? Can you subcontract to another company to do the pen test for us? Because, hey, we want to make the sale at the same time. And there's nothing wrong, because when you're starting out as a consulting firm, you may not have enough people to do all the tests that you're going to end up selling. You want to sell more, so your company gets bigger, you get more clients. At the same time, if you do not have a mobile apps pen test skill set in the company right now, how do you know the person you're hiring is actually a good mobile app pen tester? Well, you already sold 5 pen tests already on that topic. Okay, so a lot of times, as a client, you want to ask those direct questions. I've even had some clients ask me to get my tester on the line, and they've interviewed them. Nothing wrong with that. You want to spend $50,000, $100,000 on a pen test. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, consulting firm, can I talk to your tester? Can I evaluate their skill set? You would do that if you were hiring a person. Why not do that with the company? Okay. Will the report reflect reality? We'll talk about reports later, but when you are talking about those goals, it's important to have that conversation with the consulting firm and say, is the report going to be related to my goals? I want a pen test because I want to comply with HIPAA, right? But the report is written for PCI. Would that even make sense? So clarifying that beforehand and making sure the report isn't going to be just something like straight out of a template, and then now you're looking at it going, will my CFO like paying for this? Will my data governance officer like this? Will my HIPAA assessor look at the report and go, this was written for a healthcare company? you know I'm a healthcare company, but your report talks all about credit card data. We don't have any credit card data. So
No findings, done.
No
Great,
findings, yeah.
Awesome, you guys are looking good.
no, the finding is you did not have credit card data. And this is where the buckets come in, and I'll let Andrew talk about the bucket.
So I want to talk about the bucket story. I'm shoehorning in one other thing real quick. I wanted to mention it. So I'm currently working in an internal role as a director of cybersecurity for a large healthcare organization, but I've worked for 3 different consulting firms over the course of my career. And on at least 10 or 15 occasions, especially with the smaller firms, sales has sold something, and then the director calls me up and says, hey, we sold this thing, we don't know how to do it, figure it out. What do we need? We got a mobile test in a week. What do you need to accomplish that in an effective way? And do we have what we need to conduct a presentation? But
Yes.
We'll keep going. But I think it happens a lot more often than you would expect. And the trouble there is it's not always transparent to the client. And the client doesn't always know. Hey, Company X said they'd be happy to give us a mobile test. In reality, they don't have the skills to do it, and they're going to try to find the skills in the 3 weeks leading up to the start date. And are those going to be good skills? Are those going to be comprehensive? Are they going to outsource it? What does that look like? It gets messier. It's not saying it's not going to guarantee a bad result, but the risk goes up, and you as the client don't have visibility on that always. But it doesn't fit into our bucket. This was a real situation, happened about a year ago. I wanted an internal network pen test. We had some very specific goals, and we didn't want a general, drop into the network, run responder, then try to pivot through AD. We had some specific areas we wanted to target with a specific set of engineering skills. And I even had a buddy of mine working at a large pen test firm who I knew had the skills to do it. And he was excited about the idea. So I got on the phone with him and one of his sales guys, and we started talking through it. It was an hour-long phone call talking about the engineering. Really exciting. We were on the same page. My goals were lining up with what he could do, and everything was perfect there from an engineering discussion standpoint. And what this should have boiled down to was, hey, let me pay for 80 hours worth of this guy's time, and we'll get the job done. And then we'll write whatever report. But we ran into a problem because of the size of the consultancy and the rigid way they do sales. There are certain types of services that they offer, certain types of buckets of services that they offer. And what I was asking for didn't fit into any of those. And so we got through this fantastic engineering discussion, really excited. Hey, we're gonna give EDR a run for its money. We're gonna do some evasion stuff. We're gonna really hit some areas hard on the network that don't normally get touched. It's gonna be really interesting. And the sales guy's like,
not on my menu.
Yeah, it's not on my list here. And I hate to say it, but that's where that conversation died. We tried to have follow-up discussions, but the quoting process, the statement of work just fell apart because of the rigid structure of the way they do sales. And it didn't fit into what they normally sold, even though on the back end it would have just been hours. Hey, give me 80 hours of this guy's time, at $225, $250 an hour, and let's go through it and write me a report at the end. Not that complicated.
Yep, that's you.
Oh, that's me. All right. Responsiveness and project management. Exciting. Okay, so love-hate relationship with project management. I love it a lot, but it stays on top of me.
You love to hate it or hate to love it?
Yes. Okay. Is it Friday and my PM's asking for updates, or is it Monday and I'm telling the team what to do? Communication and project management. So there's a recurring theme throughout this whole presentation about transparency and communication between client and consultant, and that's a huge deal. You want to talk to each other, have an understanding, be open and honest and transparent. In those initial stages when working with an outside consulting firm, you want to make sure that they're timely, they're respectful of your time. do they have the resources available? Do they have the time on their schedule to do what you're asking? Or are they just happy to take your phone calls and potentially line up the sale? Are they well organized? Do they miss meetings? Do they do they ignore emails? Do they not get back to you for weeks? Not naming any names. But is there a dedicated project manager on their side? It's something that I've run into quite a lot, and it surprises me. Most consulting firms will have dedicated project managers, and they serve a critical role. They let the testers do the testing, they let the directors do other things, and management do other things, and the project managers coordinate the meetings, can coordinate the conversation, and make sure things happen on schedule and get done. But if you call up a consultancy firm and everything sounds good, but there's no project manager, that's kind of a red flag. Like who's keeping track? Who's making sure that we're hitting those milestones and moving the project forward? And again, are they respectful of your time? Do they miss meetings? Do they show up late? How do they communicate to you? As I said, if a firm is disrespectful or unorganized, it could mean that they're overwhelmed with other work, and they're not capable of taking on the project that you're asking for, or maybe they don't have a project management team, or they have a bad project management team. And I think any of those, they're not necessarily deal breakers, but they're red flags. It could increase the risk. Anytime I sign a statement of work and I don't see a project manager on the other side, I'm thinking to myself, the report's going to be late.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to that also is discuss time zones. When it comes to project management, you got to understand the start-stop time. When does the test start? When does it end? But time zone is very important. There's nothing wrong with having overseas testers. There's a lot of really good talent in the US and outside the US. But if your tester is going to be testing during the time all of you are sleeping, and they have a question, which is sometimes the question is important enough they cannot test without an answer to it, you lost a whole day of testing, really a whole night of testing, right? If they ran a scan, for example, or they were testing something and something went down, and they were testing that specific application has gone down now, well, something pretty bad has happened. I would write that down as a finding in my opinion. But at the same time, I can't test anymore. I gotta wait for your team to wake up next morning, and then I'll test the night after that, right? So discuss the time zones, understand when the testing is gonna happen, and make sure resources are available on both sides for that.
And it's critical for a number of reasons. But we'll talk about price transparency a little bit further on. But on the back end, 99% of the time, it boils down to engineering hours. And so if your tester's testing overnight and they run into a problem, they're going to test for an 8-hour block, and at 2 a.m., 2 hours into their testing, they run into a problem, and that stops them dead in the water. And then your team can't respond to their emails for another 6 hours? Is that 6 hours lost?
Yeah.
How does that company handle it? Is there an escalation chain to try to resolve it? Is there other stuff that can be done to give them work to do to keep working? Because 6 hours could be a lot of money. And if you have multiple testers working on a single project, it just multiplies.
Yeah, so, average rate is like $200, $250 an hour right now in the consulting firms. That's a lot of money there for sure. So, very important piece of information. If there's one thing you walk away with from here, ask for a sample deliverable. Ask for a sample report from the consulting firm. If you don't know what the report is going to look like, you're not gonna like whatever you receive after spending $50,000, because it will either not be something that fits your organizational culture, or it is maybe great quality, but they wrote it from a different perspective. Okay, I had a pen test where I was testing 35 applications. When you're doing that, it's very important to know if you want all 35 in one report or 35 separate reports. Okay. And at the same time, understanding what the client was looking for is important. So ask for a sample report. If the company doesn't have it, consulting firm doesn't have it, Ask them to go and redact a client report and send it to you. Right? I don't want to spend $50,000 or something that I have not seen.
If they don't have a sample report, that might be another red flag.
Yeah. So as we're talking about reporting, it's very important that when you look at the report, it speaks to you about your environment. Okay? If you, for example, are heavily Linux environment and the report is all about Windows, did they just not touch the Linux environment? Did they not have the skill set for it? If I am a healthcare company and there's no discussion of ePHI in there, they gained domain admin. They gained access to databases, but they did not even attempt to gain access to ePHI. Do they even know what business I'm in? I was working for a healthcare provider, and they wrote a critical finding. We saw your critical information for doctors online. Okay, what information is it? Oh, we saw the NPI numbers. So do you know what NPI stands for? No, National Public Identity. It's public information, all right? Like you are telling me that you found public information is critical, and nothing wrong with you thinking that, right? You saw some random numbers in front of a name, that looks kind of serious, but Google, see what that actually means, right? One finding they wrote was sensitive services exposed to the internet. The sensitive service, port 22, SSH, right? Or
Sensitive.
it's very sensitive, yeah. And they also wrote a finding stating that we had really outdated SSH server, not realizing it was Red Hat with backported patches.
Headers.
Okay, so yeah, they just looked at the header. They never tried to log in. There was no attempt of trying to go the next step. Okay, you give me a report and you said you guessed the password. That doesn't mean anything to me. What did you do with that password? Did you even find that we have MFA that you couldn't use that password with? Did you even try to log in to email? Did you even try to log into maybe a payroll system? What do you do with that information is what's going to be important. Show me impact in that report. Don't just give me a finding. The self-signed certificate on the internal network is not going to matter as much as a self-signed certificate on the external network. Okay? And I still see reports with, oh, you're using TLS 1.1. It's a high-risk issue. Well, show me. Like, show the impact. Don't just hand me a finding, right? So as you're looking at the sample deliverable, look for those things. And I'll end that with, and I'll hand it over to you. Vulnerability scan is not a pen test. Giving me a Nessus report with your logo on it is not a pen test report. I could run Nessus scan myself for $2,500.
Yeah.
I did not want to pay $50,000 for a Nessus scan. Okay, so be very mindful of these things because there is a lot of that still happening nowadays. We've been making jokes about Nessus as a pen test tool for many years now, and that stuff is still happening.
If you find a consultancy firm that sells you a full-fledged pen test for $2,000, you're probably getting a Nessus scan.
Yeah. So this is kind of hard to see, but we're moving on to the consultant section, and I drink and I know things because I'm a consultant.
I actually have a new story about the reporting piece.
Oh, I'm going back.
Yeah. So this is actually
Wait,
one
new
that
story? Is that about us?
No,
Okay.
it's not you, it's someone else, and it's not catastrophic, but it goes to show it was a failure on my part. We had a purple team operation conducted in conjunction with an external third party, and the purple team op itself was fantastic. Huge value there. The tactical level, the teams were working together well. We got a lot of great results out of it, a lot of great takeaways, and it gave us ideas and pushed us further. But the report that we got, so as a purple team op, the report that we got was very much structured like a pen test report. And it kind of outlined technical risk. It highlighted the attacks that were performed, but the attacks that were performed were conducted in a purple team context. So it's not necessarily that we were vulnerable to the attacks, but that's what was used to exercise the detection and response systems. However, if you glance at the report, it looks like a pen test report, and it looks like we're vulnerable to all these. A legal team glancing at this report is going to be like, did you guys fix all these? Did you guys fix all these attacks that we're vulnerable to? No, that's not what that was. But the structure of the report was such that it gave that perspective.
Yeah.
And it led to confusion, and we had to fix the report on the back end. But that was a situation where, hey, I should have asked for a sample report. We should have talked over it ahead of time and resolved that, so we weren't trying to fix it afterwards. That way, the report communicated what we were trying to achieve and what we actually achieved in the exercise, rather than looking like a pen test report with a whole bunch of unfixed vulnerabilities that weren't really vulnerabilities.
That's you.
All right. So stepping into the consultant perspective, or the consultancy perspective, I think one of the best things you can do is you can tailor the work to the client. It's kind of calls back to that initial talking about goals. Engage with the client, talk about their environment, talk about what they want to do, talk about what they want to achieve, talk about how testing should be performed, where the focuses should be, where the risks are. We already talked about reporting and tailoring reporting accordingly. But I think transparency about how the work is being done, open communication, and respectful communication of, hey, this is how we're going to step through our process and help you achieve your goals and deliver that final high-value report. It's critical, and there's a lot of companies that will go through the initial stages, sign off on the work, and then quietly do the test in the background, and the tester is never actually on the phone with like the blue team or the internal representatives. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes as a client, it's a fairly isolated test, and if it's a web app that we just need to do our annual pen test, or mobile app where, hey, we don't need to necessarily chat about it over the course of the process. Sometimes that working in a box is okay, but if you're doing an internal pen test in a large network, and scope is only so much, but the network's massive, and you're trying to find out how best to use your time, talk to the client. Have those discussions about what the client wants to test, where are the areas of focus, what are they concerned about, and work through it. Adjust your communication level to what the client prefers. Some clients want start and stop emails every day, or an end of the week wrap up email saying, hey, we tested all week long, we found these high value findings, you'll get more details in the report. Some clients don't want to talk to the consultants at all, and that's okay too, but have those discussions ahead of time so you can get out in front of that and make sure that you're fitting what the client's expecting.
So we already touched on quite a bit of this. One thing I do want to mention here, and it goes into the transparency slide. If you
Back
are,
up
huh? Yeah, that's you. If you want a pen test to be done and report to be delivered on December 31st, you may want to tell and schedule that before December 25th. Had a client, really big name in the industries, wanting a pen test. They were going live with the product on January 1st. But they came to us end of the December, like a week or two left. We still got the pen test done, because hey, money. But we had critical findings where you could see patient data without providing credentials on public internet. They still went live January 1st. Okay, so speak to as a consultant, it's important for us to speak to the client about their goals and their method and capabilities, but at the same time, speak to your own capabilities about timing. If you want a good pen test, go to the consulting firm and have them do it in Q1 or Q2. Q4 is a really busy time and the worst time to do the pen test. Right? We're competing against PTO versus getting billable hours, and then you end up with some places where we were in one place where they were paying us extra as testers to work extra hours. Okay, so just be careful with that. Price transparency.
All right, this was a huge pet peeve of mine. I'll try to run through it quickly, so I try not to complain too much. But there's a huge amount of companies out there that will happily hand you a quote that says one pen test, $50,000, please, and there's no additional details, no detailed statement of work. Just yeah, no, we'll do that pen test, and this is how much it's going to charge. But as we kind of talked about a little bit already, on the back end, the price is almost always determined by the number of hours worked. So one thing that I've seen inside the consulting firms is sometimes the consulting firm will undercut their competition and slash engineering hours to fit that without making it transparent to the customer. So, pen testing firm 1, quotes at 50,000. Pen testing firm 2 says, "Oh, they quoted 50,000. We'll do it for 30,000." And without transparency, the client may not be aware that you're getting the same deal on an hour-by-hour basis.
Yeah.
But you're just not seeing those hours disappear. At $250 an hour, one engineer for 40 hours a week is $10,000. If you get client or consulting firm A quotes 10,000 and consulting firm B quotes 5,000, consulting firm B may present the same statement of work, but really they're only putting 20 hours in that test instead of 40.
Yeah, I mean, put the number of hours, put the cost on the SOW. Let's be transparent.
And I don't think there's any good reason to hide that breakdown. So price transparency is critical to me. If I have to reverse engineer your quote, your statement of work to find out where my money's going, I'm gonna be annoyed at the outset. But yeah, that can be a little bit of a red flag. But it's fairly common just to kind of disguise it.
Yeah. So one more thing in the consultant perspective, and this really dives into the next topic, which is going to be by the candidate perspective, but training and culture. As consulting firms, one of the things that we often fail at is the training perspective. I've seen some firms require things like you have to have OSCP to be a consultant. I teach OSCP in the after hours, and I can tell you, no. It doesn't create good consultants. It doesn't create good pen testers, all right? But cross-training among your organization is great. Creating a culture of positivity. We've got a lot of negativity in this industry. We are all leads. We all feel like we know the best. We all have opinions on things. But when you do not have a culture of collaboration, you have a culture of competition among your own employees. And that just creates a terrible work environment. Right? So, as we talk about that, we jump into the interview red flags.
So we're running a little short time. We'll run through these really quick. So there's a couple more stories here, but I think really the high level takeaways here is if you're a candidate, if you're looking to get a job with a consulting firm, keep an eye on the documentation. Keep an eye on what they're offering you. Look at NDAs, non-compete agreements as you're walking in the door. Those are pretty standard. Non-compete agreements are fairly standard. NDAs are extremely standard because you're dealing with sensitive information from a bunch of different clients. But keep an eye on the time frame. A 5-year NDA, is a little unreasonable. A 3-year NDA might make sense in some contexts, but generally 12 months. 12 months after leaving the company is my experience, pretty standard. Non-competes are pretty vicious too, especially in certain contexts. Sometimes companies will put unenforceable non-compete agreements in the documentation that you sign, and you're pressured into signing it. And it's got, like I said, unenforceable from a legal standpoint, but it's meant to scare you. It's meant to. So I've seen non-compete agreements that say that you cannot go work for another consulting firm for 5 years. And it's like, yeah, and that's not really. It's state by state. That's not really something that can be enforced.
Yeah.
But the employee doesn't always know that, and so you feel like you're stuck in this job, and you can't go take those skills elsewhere when you discover that it's a highly toxic workplace and you want to leave. If you're in the interview process and they're disrespecting your time, or if you're unable to meet with your future team or your future manager, those are huge red flags. Keep an eye out for those. An interview should always be a two-way street. It should always be mutually respectful and a good, productive conversation. If if it's 6 interviews of them grilling you on technical skills and you never get to actually meet the people you're going to be working with or working for, maybe go find something else. There's a whole lot of openings in the field. Grilling the interviewee is a serious problem, or being elitist. If you walk into an interview and the interviewer is elitist, like no, just don't put up with that. Go hunt somewhere else.
Yeah, and you know what? Turn it around. Ask the hiring manager when was the last time they took PTO. Right? Ask them when was the last time they went for a training. Why are you hiring right now? Did you have layoffs recently? It's a two-way interview. Why not? Okay. So, as you are going through the interview process, assess the employer also. Think about the reputation. Check Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a great place for you to see sort of Yelp reviews for employers. What kind of technology do they use? I was working at a place where I was using a Dell Inspiron for my pen testing. I would do pen testing in the daytime, and I would take it to my hotel room in the evening, and it would be cracking passwords. Okay, while I'm sleeping, it's running in the background, it's cracking passwords. The hotel didn't have a heat bill because my laptop was heating the room up, but it was terrible, right? And then I would use the same laptop to run Nessus scans as I'm writing a report for the previous client. So think about that. What kind of technology are they using internally? How often are they double, triple booked on an engagement? That's a big red flag, okay? And what is their billable goal? If their billable goal, which is the goal for you, how many hours you spend on a client engagement, if it's 100%, well, when do I go to the bathroom? All right? So think about and ask those questions directly, because they're gonna have a big role in your work there.
Most consulting firms should have a very specific billable goal that they're targeting for any consultants working for them. And 80% is generally a good number.
It's probably the highest I would go for, 60 to 80%.
Yeah, you start going north of 80% and you're stressing out and overworking people.
Yeah.
You're pushing them in the 50, 60-hour weeks.
Because when you take PTO, you're not billable.
Yeah.
So, in conclusion, beans have been spilled. It's kind of hard to see in there.
I love that picture.
But always look for transparency, both client and the consultant, okay, and the candidate. Look for transparency in there.
I think that's it. 5 minutes for questions.
And we've got some stickers and business cards in here if you want any. But questions?
So earlier you mentioned making sure a PM was assigned for the Pentest. Is that, are you suggesting getting a separate PM outside of the sales or account manager?
No. So the question was asking about a project manager from the consultancy firm during those initial conversations. I would say so long as a project manager is present, that's a good sign. It's when you're going through those sales and early engineering discussions and building out the scope of work, if there's no project manager present, then you maybe want to ask about it. But depending on your circumstance, you might want to ask for specific PM, have some more questions there. But I think the biggest red flag for me is when we start having those discussions and the project manager is just non-existent. That either tells me they don't have project managers, or they've got a very limited project management team, and there could be some disorganization.
There is no industry in the world that has more ADHD than pen testers. All right, you expect us to manage our time? Not gonna happen. Mm-hmm. Okay. If it was up to me, I would never stop pen testing, which means I would never end up writing a report, which nobody loves writing a report. Okay. So project manager plays a very important role in that, making sure things are on time, making sure that we are delivering on time, making sure that goals are met of the test. So it's definitely a dedicated project manager, not necessarily a project manager specific to that client. Maybe they're taking on 10 clients, but their job is to make sure that goals are met and timelines are met.
Yeah.
Are there any projects that make you stand out more as a candidate for Pentest world?
Ooh, you want to take that one?
Sure. The question is, are there any projects that make you stand out more as a candidate? One of those is right now, right here. You're at a conference, right? It's a little difficult to show your work in pen testing than maybe in development. Okay, you don't have a portfolio that you can show, but doing things like Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, and most importantly, being at a conference, especially a small conference like BSides, amazing place for hiring. There are probably a lot of hiring managers in here right now, a lot of candidates in here right now. And also, one of the things I will recommend for everybody wanting to get a role in pen testing, figure out a way to present at a conference. Everybody has something to share. We all do. We may feel like we don't, but we all have something to share. Or at least do what we're doing. Stand up and just complain. Right?
These are all the terrible firms I tried to get hired by.
Yeah. But definitely find a way to present, do CTFs, and most of all, make connections. Talk to people.
I'd say, as a hiring manager, one of the things that I love to hear most from a prospective candidate is like a passion project, something technical, either from a previous job or something outside, something you're excited about that's technical, and just something that you can just ramble on and on about. Because I'll let you go and just listen. Yeah, because the passion's really important. Technical skills, details can be learned along the way, they can be trained, but that drive is huge.
Well, one last question. Yeah, go ahead.
You had mentioned NDAs at one point. What are your thoughts on clients requesting individual?
So the question is, what are your thoughts about clients requesting in NDAs for the testers for that project?
For a project with individual assigns to the client by the tester.
Oh. Ooh, I'm walking away from that.
I'm not allowed to talk about that per.
So the question is, the tester signing an NDA individually for the client. So as a hiring manager, as a manager inside a consulting firm, I would push back against that. Right? I'm not having my tester sign an NDA to you for two reasons. One, I don't know if that tester is going to do the test for you. Things can change. Maybe they need a PTO right at last minute. Maybe they end up in a hospital. Okay, so that's going to be a nightmare in terms of scheduling, because now I have to find another tester to sign an NDA. Second, I'm going to lose people if I ask them to sign NDAs with a client individually, because now they're individually responsible. So that the legal backing of the company gets into muddy water in there. I've sometimes have clients ask me to do a background check for a tester for them, and that's a pain.
Yeah.
NDA is going to be even bigger pain.
Yeah, I think the request for individual background checks and the request for individual NDAs kind of fall into a similar bucket. And in my experience, I've seen testers refuse because, from a legal standpoint, the relationship between the two companies, there's an overarching NDA that should cover everything. And most clients, 90% of clients are happy with that. I think some clients do get specific, they get picky, they want to run individual background checks and do individual NDAs, but that gets messy real quick. I'm with Q, I would push back against that, but it does happen. And sometimes you're a consultancy firm and you've got a multi-million-dollar client that's throwing their weight around, and you have to play ball. And it's a rough situation, but like I said, I'm opposed to it, but sometimes it's just the reality of working with really big companies.
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. We got stickers in here if you want any.
Please take the stickers. We need to get rid of the stickers.
Yeah, I'm trying to get rid of the stickers.
Right on time.